There exists a consistent type of non-thinking people out there who for some reason seem to believe and genuinely promote the idea that it would be better if we would abandon ideologies altogether and that we should instead be pragmatists. Now, such a view is not only devoid of reality, but it also conveniently ignores that pragmatism, as it pertains to politics, is in itself an ideological position in all but name only. It's the ideology of realpolitik, which insists that immediate interests and circumstances trumps any moral, philosophical, or ideological worldview. Now, what the proponents of such approach conveniently ignore is that even realpolitik decisions are based on an underlying moral framework and also an explicit order that some interests are more important than others. But why would one believe such thing? That's our episode on Feel Good Mythology. Hello everyone and welcome to another installment of Feel Good Mythology. Alright, this video is meant to address the incredibly vacuous claim that we would all be better off if we would just abandon ideologies altogether and if the world would be more interested in ideas, experiences and experiments, as one guy who I don't particularly like but follow on Facebook said recently. Now, to keep some structure, we'll first take a stab at the claim itself and then look at who says it and then look at why people end up believing such mythology. So, the claim itself is very easy and essentially self-refuting. An ideology is a set of ideas and positions based on experiences and experiments past and future. The reason we don't believe communism to be a good idea is precisely because of past experiences and experiments. It has been tried, ended up killing over 100 million people, and rational, non-insane minds are thus compelled to conclude that it's a bad set of ideas. So a world without ideologies, but with more interests in ideas, experiences, and experiments would still essentially be just like this one, since ideas, experiences, and experiments are essential ingredients to forming ideologies. Alright, but let's take the more complicated route. Let's take the wider claim that a world without ideology would be great. The best representatives of the mindset that I'm aiming at is Terence McKenna. Now, McKenna was essentially a loon, basically a self-aggrandizing junkie taken seriously for the most part by other junkies. However, some of his ideas have spilled over to non-junkies and through repetition by others who failed to quote the source, his ideas ended up being believed even by people who otherwise seem rather normal. So, the relevant quote goes as follows. I believe that a world without ideology could be created if what were put in place of ideology were the notion of the realization of the good, the true, and the beautiful. You know, the three-tiered canon of the Platonic aesthetic, close quote. Now, this is from Opening the Doors of Creativity, published in 1990. It's an audio cassette, not a book. Now, mind you, McKenna wasn't particularly innovative with this, or particularly new with this lunacy. He just happened to be born in the right place at the right time to popularize it. For instance, a similar feeling was transmitted by another mystic named Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, more commonly known as Osho. If you haven't heard of him, consider yourself lucky. You have no idea how much of this madness I have to go to read in the process of doing research for these videos. Anyway, this Indian guy had this to say about ideologies, quote, no ideology can help to create a new world or a new mind or a new human being, because ideological orientation itself is the root cause of all the conflicts and all the miseries. Thought creates boundaries, thought creates divisions, and thought creates prejudices. Thought itself cannot bridge them. That's why all ideologies fail. Now, man must learn to live without ideologies, religious, political, or otherwise. When the mind is not tethered to any ideology, it is free to move to new understandings, and in that freedom flowers all that is good and all that is beautiful. Now this is basically the ancestor idea of the more modern talk of they're all the same, man, they're all the same. And also a common ancestor to the distinctly leftist idea that all religions are the same, therefore a million Muslims or a million new Muslims in Europe are fantastic. Now, neither Osho nor the modern day followers of his ideas managed to answer what happens when the Muslims disagree, but that's another topic for another day. So, as you can see, these wider claims also tend to self-refute. If ideology is bad and instead of it we should strive for the notion or the realization of the good, the true and the beautiful, as McKenna said, then the obvious question emerges. What is good and beautiful? Who decides what is good and beautiful? What should it be done when conflicting notions of good and beautiful emerge? Now, every single answer to these questions must be an ideological one. If you answer that every individual decides for himself what's good and beautiful, say hello to libertarianism. If you say that monopoly courts decides what happens when conflicting notions emerge, say hello to minarchist conservatism. If you say that mutually agreed private arbiters mitigate this, say hello to anarcho-capitalism. If you say that community votes on this and everyone abides by the result, no matter how batshit crazy the result is, and everyone gets an equal vote, say hello to anarcho-collectivism. The fact of the matter is that you cannot escape ideology. Every single answer to any question regarding policy is located somewhere on the political spectrum, and it's part of one or more ideologies, and all of them are that way. In essence, the position that we could just abolish ideology is just feel-good mythology. It doesn't work that way in reality. Alright? Now that was easy. Now let's look at who says it, and then we'll go to the main question of why people end up believing this. Now, there are basically three categories of people who promote this idea. Those with an agenda, those ignorant, and the true believers. The second and the third category have a lot in common. In a way, they're both ignorant, but the true believers cannot be persuaded. Ironically, they have adopted an ideology themselves, the ideology that ideology is bad. I mean, it sounds ridiculous when you put it this way, but that's really what it is. Now, those ignorant on complex matters tend to grow out of it sooner or later. There are actually very few people older than 30 who still fall for this. It's mostly a youngsters phenomenon. Those with an agenda, however, are the most dangerous ones. These are people who use this kind of rhetoric knowing full well that they're bullshitting and knowingly deceiving the public, and these resides almost exclusively to the left. Now, for the sake of full honesty, I won't say that these kinds of people don't exist on the right as well, but I have yet to find one. So please, help me here. Find me a real person. It can be a blogger with 3 readers. It doesn't have to be someone known. But please, find me a real person that argues that left and right don't matter and that we should move beyond ideology, whilst at the same time argues largely on conservative policies. I tried really hard to find one and I couldn't. But I still presume there has to be at least one. But in any event, the overwhelming majority of those who use this kind of rhetoric and aren't batshit crazy or ignorant about politics tend to be leftists. Once again, I would love to see someone arguing for moving beyond ideology and then argue for praying to Jesus, cutting taxes and regulations, controlling borders, promoting normal, healthy and intact families, and shrinking the government. Most of the time, it's all of the same, we should move beyond ideology thingy, this kind of talk comes in the same package with more collectivism, more forced equality of outcome, more regulations, more anti-capitalist nonsense, more biology denialism, and generally more leftism. These kinds of people genuinely aim at ignorance and disgruntled idealists who simply don't know better. And this is how we slide into the main question asked at the beginning of the video. Why do people fall for this nonsense? Now, there is no definitive answer to this question, but there are a few obvious answers. First of all, most people are ignorant about politics. This has always been the case and will continue to be the case for years and decades to come. One consequence of this is that people associate a political set of ideas with a political party. Now, sometimes that association is accurate, but most of the times it isn't. The Conservative Party in Britain, for instance, is to the left of the Social Democratic Party in Romania and much further to the left of the Democratic Party in the United States. To this confusion, the media contributes quite a lot. For instance, Marine Le Pen in France is labeled as far right by the media, even though she is to the left of François Fillon, that would be the Republican candidate, both on economics and on most social issues. From this confusion, combined with the practice that politics is never ideal and that most politicians are career politicians and more often than not unprincipled fuckwits, it stands to reason that someone who is generally ignorant of political philosophies will witness over the course of 4 to 12 years at least one spectacular failure of each mainstream political party. This is particularly true in the United States, where you have a strong contingent of 20 to 35-year-olds who've seen Bush failing and then Obama failing. Not understanding that these two men aren't necessarily archetypes of leftism or rightism goes a long way into ending up falling for the "it's all the same" rhetoric. In fact, the US elections of 2016 was the first time when this kind of rhetoric did not work. And there were several reasons. Chief among them was the fact that Trump did what most Republicans would never dream of doing, namely to respond in kind to the leftist demonization and force the discussion on policies rather than character. Everyone agreed that both Clinton's and Trump's character kinda sucked, so everyone was forced to then look on policies and on serious violations, both aspects being on the losing side for the Democrat nominee. But this was the exception. The rule is for this rhetoric to actually work and be winnable for the left. Case in point, the last French presidential elections where this rhetoric actually made Hollande president. Another example is the last Swedish elections where both interested partisan hacks and ignorant folks made the case that all Swedish parties are corrupt and largely the same. Now, of course, that wasn't exactly true, but it worked, and instead of more votes going to Moderaterna and Sverigedemokraterna, more votes went to the Social Democrats, who ended up forming the disdainful Red-Green Alliance and create further mess in the country. Besides, this idea that you're above ideology and that you're more enlightened and that you take a middle-of-the-road approach, as if that wouldn't be an ideological position per se, this kind of thing may be false and wrong, but it feels good. It is a highly efficient tool of intellectual masturbation. Now, is there a solution for this? Well, there isn't, at least not an easy one. Feel-good mythologies tend to gain a life of their own and are very, very hard to quash. I mean, seriously, just look at socialism. An obviously insane idea that refuses to die. Even 100 plus million murders later and countless collateral victims who've been robbed, enslaved, bitten, imprisoned, humiliated, etc., etc., yet it still will not die. Why? Because it feels good. One efficient way of persuading the beyond ideology crowd is to speak the moral language. Now sure, some of them start having doubts on their enlightenment the second you point them to the fact that every position of theirs actually is on the political spectrum anyway. With enough back and forth, you can easily spot the consistencies and predict accurately where they fall on the spectrum. But most will not. Most will insist that they take, quote, what's best from all sides, unquote. And to these people, moral language works better. Now, what do I mean by moral language? Well, expose them to the arguments that I made in another feel-good mythology episode, the one about moderation. Show them that moderation is oftentimes evil and that the compromise position between poison and non-poison is still a poisoned position, no matter how you look at it. Do that in a witty way and insert some jokes into it, and before you know it, you have that individual looking for political things to read on his own. I'm speaking from experience here. There are at least 50 shitlords out there who've come to the right side after I spoke moral language with them. Now, it's hard and you're going to be dismissed more often than being successful, but not doing anything, i.e., being moderate about it, will definitely allow things to get worse and will not improve anything. This post-ideology nonsense is the equivalent of believing in a flat earth. As a leftist blog put it, thinking without ideology is like breathing without lungs. And mind you, this saying comes from a hardline Obama fan. But nevertheless, it is true. The second you engage in thinking, you engage in ideology. You may not like it, you may not want it, or you may not even realize that you're doing it, but ideology is here to stay with all of us forever and ever till the end of times. I mean, even if we do end up being ruled by an artificial intelligence that would run politics in a technocratic manner and render elections obsolete, that sounds dystopian, but even that scenario is still an ideological one. That artificial intelligence would still have to run on certain assumptions. No matter what those assumptions would be, they would still have to be ideological. Alright, I think that's enough. So, do tell me in the comments, have you met these kinds of post-ideological people? Did I miss something from the analysis? Or maybe you think I'm wrong and that a world without ideology can realistically exist outside of being high on drugs. Hey, I was wrong before, maybe you can prove me wrong. I'd love to hear a more convincing case for this mythology. If it's convincing enough, I might make a follow-up video on this. Who knows? Anyway, so with all of that being said, thank you for watching, thank you for your continuous and generous support, and I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.